teenager, and I've had a UN flag flying from my front porch since the beginning of the war. And it pains me to think of how our respect for the United Nations has been drained away in these years under the current administration. And I would like to know what you would do to restore our respect as a country for the United Nations and the United Nations' respect for America.
It's a great question. I think the place to start is to acknowledge both the strengths and the weaknesses of the United Nations. And I know you've already heard from folks, so I'm the person who's supposed to be doing most of the talking here. I am going to ask Samantha, who studies this. I'm going to ask Samantha, who studies this deeply, to make some remarks just to respond to this after I answer. But the United Nations has its flaws, and it's important for those of us who believe in international cooperation to acknowledge those flaws. I mean, you have certain divisions of the United Nations, like the Human Rights Commission, which has become a farce as a consequence of countries like Zimbabwe being elevated and being major spokespersons for that agency. That is untenable, given the track record of human rights violations in Zimbabwe. And that's just one example of where we have to acknowledge that the United Nations is in need of reform, and we have to speak out forcefully when we see abuses within the United Nations. What we then also have to do is affirm that there are things that the United Nations does very well. That some of their humanitarian programs are extraordinarily effective. And they're very committed people who are doing excellent work. So we also have to point out the successes. And then finally we have to understand that how successful the United Nations is largely a function of what we put into it and what other powerful countries put into it. And if we disempower it, then it's not going to be particularly effective. If we decide that we want to use it as a critical forum to advance not only our national interests, but the broader interests of the globe, then it'll be more effective. And, you know, somebody, I'm sure I'm not getting this quote exactly right, Samantha will get it exactly right. But you know, blaming the United Nations for some of the problems that take place is like blaming Wrigley Field for the Cubs not winning. You know, it is a venue and a forum for potential cooperation, but it is not going to magically solve problems if countries like the United States aren't willing to use it. So, Samantha, anything you want to add on that?
I guess all I would say is that, I mean, amplifying your points, is that we all, and this is a point that was made in the defense policy panel earlier, the imbalance between military might and the resort to military might and the need for civilian expertise exists not only in this country, but exists within the UN system as a whole. So we've got to ramp up the complement to military force. The UN, for all of the criticisms that people make of it, currently has 130,000 peacekeepers active in 17 conflict areas around the world. These are conflict areas we might have to worry about if it weren't for these peacekeepers. But the same kind of syndrome that you have talked so much about in terms of the U.S. failure to fill out our provincial reconstruction teams and to create, you know, to have agricultural expertise and policing expertise and customs expertise and so forth. It's the global system as a whole, and not just the American foreign policy establishment that is lacking these tools. So I think part of the global conversation that you know, Barack has said he wants to spearhead is, are we pooling all of our resources to tend to the commons? And in order to get those resources, we've got to go state by state by state by state by state. You know, the UN's not going to just suddenly, people don't fall from the heavens with UN passports. They come from countries. go to universities, and we need to somehow recruit them to be part of confronting these unconventional threats.
The line Senator on cement is just wonderful, but I don't want to undercut that, but you should know that a major theme of the morning panel was that you deprived her of her ringside tickets. In an effort to kind of cover that